So God, I was praying about it, and I felt like God was telling me to do the message about love, which is like, I'm like probably the least qualified person to do a message on love. But the good thing is that God doesn't call the qualified; He qualifies the called. So you see lots and lots and lots of examples in the Bible of where God calls like the people you would never think of, and actually, the last become first, and it's very easy to say, oh, well, I can't do this. I'm a hypocrite. I don't love people like the Bible tells you love people, and then it can really make you not do things for God. And you can really let the devil creep in. And so I would challenge everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about love today, and I challenge everyone to, don't let the devil creep in and sort of like tamper what God has called you to do in your life or whatever. So anyhow, I wanted to talk about, actually, there's two different places in the New Testament that really sort of, if you read and really think about what they're saying, it really should kind of blow your mind about love. and that's the first part of it is that I have is from Matthew chapter 5, which I'm sure most people have probably heard of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus was talking to not just the disciples, but there was quite a crowd that had formed. And up until that point, the Jewish culture was such where like you would be kind and love like fellow Jews, but really the people that were not Jews, it was pretty much an exclusionist type of a culture. Not to say that people would be like mean to other cultures, but it was sort of like you're in the club or you're out of the club, And if you went against the Jews, well, then you were, out of the club for sure. It was very, very much a culture of, elitist. We're called from God. We're, you're not, and it was a, and it was a different, so you have to think about that as like, that was sort of like the people that he was talking to, and like the disciples, his thought process from before is that that's what God wanted us to do. And actually God called them to be set apart in the, if you read the Old Testament. So then Jesus sort of comes on the scene and says that although we are supposed to be called, set apart, we are supposed to also love everyone. And they're like, right? We're supposed to love like even our enemies? That doesn't sound right, And so that was like a foreign concept to them, because really up to that point, they weren't really loving their enemies. They were, quite frankly, a lot of examples, killing their enemies and really trying to be set apart to God, just the Jewish culture or whatever. So I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 5, starting, Matthew chapter 5, there's a lot of different stuff that he talks about in the Sermon on the Mount, but starting at verse 43, and if I have it here, if you can go to it if you'd like, but starting at 43, Jesus had said, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." That's what he was hearkening back to, to the Old Testament, what it talks about in the Old Testament. "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you." That's an interesting concept, right? That you would actually pray for the people that persecute you. And then, like, as part of that, it's like, we're going to go on to find out that he's not saying, like, do the prayer of, like, God, I really hope that they burn. I really hope that they really do poorly, and you just let me rise up and show them, that I'm right and they're wrong. It's not what he says, actually, although I would probably admit that I've probably prayed that prayer before. That it's so easy to say, oh, well, to go back to like what we like to try to call the fairness doctrine, that's not fair, and God, you need to right this wrong, that's not fair. Somebody says actually, and so it goes on, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven." It's kind of interesting. He's kind of quantifying that you should be set apart. "For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust." So what is it talking about there? It's talking about the fact that really, he's saying you shouldn't think like, oh, well, I know what's right, or whatever. You should know that God has providence, he has dominion. And so you really shouldn't get in that game of like trying to like always think about, well, I know what's right, God. I know what, like trying to like, look at the scales of justice, on everything. You should trust God, right? And that we may not understand why he lets, the evil prosper, but that we shouldn't, but that we should just still love them and pray for them. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? So saying the tax collectors meaning like the non-Jewish, the non-Jesus followers at this point. So it says, that's kind of interesting. It says, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? He's actually saying that if you love, like if I love my, if I love Phil, we're brothers, and I love him, like, the reward in of itself, God's really saying that's not that overly impressive, like you should love, the people that love you. Jesus is saying at this point that, pretty much everybody loves the people that love them. Like, don't be too impressed with yourself because you love the people that love you. Basically, is what Jesus is saying. It says, everyone does that, and then it says, and if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? So it's like, that's like everybody does that. Do not even the Gentiles do the same? He's hearkening back to, to not the people that aren't Jesus followers at that point. You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And people kind of struggle with that verse there and say, well, is he saying that you have to be perfect? That's what he's saying there. He's basically saying that you should be set apart and you should strive for perfection as your heavenly Father is perfect. That you shouldn't use it as an excuse to be like, well, I'm not perfect, so then I'll just treat people badly, or whatever. So interestingly, people will say, oh, well, God or Jesus calls us to love people. He really doesn't call us to love people. He commands us to love people, which is quite a bit different, actually. Some people say, oh, well, I called you. Like, if I call Emily on the phone, like, she cannot answer me, or she could say no, or whatever, If I command you to do something, then I'm saying no. Pick up the phone. You have to do this. I'm going to you in person. I'm commanding you to do something. So that's quite a bit different than saying, hey, well, if you want, come up tonight, or do whatever. It's quite a bit different. It's a command, really. And then actually Paul in 1 Corinthians, I don't know if everybody's heard the term the love chapter. This is 1 Corinthians 13. Really is like, if that doesn't blow your mind, Paul will really blow your mind. And 1 Corinthians 13, and interestingly, this passage actually really came to light again, in even in secular culture. Whenever for King and Country, actually, this is a Christian band that actually sort of started coming up through the ranks, even on secular Billboard charts and stuff. It's these Australian guys, and they have big drums and big vocals, guitars and stuff, and they started touring, and they had this song called "Proof of Your Love," and it was pretty interesting actually because they played and pretty big, not just at concerts but on shows and stuff. In fact, they actually played on the Tonight Show, which is pretty interesting, in 2012. And so in the song, it's actually the basis behind the song is 1 Corinthians 13, and so they tell them that they can play on the Tonight Show, and so they do it interestingly, they do it right at the end, and Jay literally just says to them, "Hey, what's your guys' names?" And they say their names, and he's like, "Okay, well, they're getting ready to play the thing." So you can tell that they gave no opportunity. And for really any more dialogue than that to happen, and then they sung the song, and then it cut right out to to being the show was over or whatever. So I remember sort of caught the attention of the news outlets or whatever, and they interviewed, I can't remember what news outlet it was, but they had interviewed the lead singer the day after, and they said, well, are you kind of like surprised that they let you, sing a song on the Tonight Show? And he said, it was really funny, he was like, I couldn't do his Australian accent very well, but he was like, I don't think that they understood what we were singing. And it was really funny. But it was so funny because although they didn't probably know exactly what he was talking about, or whatever, he used that to get the message out, you know what I mean? It was pretty interesting. And they went on to, they've been on a lot of actually secular shows, and they're still popular today. You can look up, their music. But I wanted to read 1 Corinthians 13, because it just, as you start walking through it, you really, really think about it. You're like, even if you were, you might call like a diehard Christian, that you're like, I know the Bible and I know, and I do all this stuff. I mean, you could be a pastor and look at this and be like, this really kind of like pushes me a little bit. If you really think about what it's saying. So anyhow, it starts, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Most people read like that verse and they're like, okay, well, maybe if I don't, if I do that and if I don't love, maybe it's like kind of like useless, but it's not that big of a deal, right? Or, that's not that impactful. If you keep reading and you're like, well, it gets a little stronger even yet. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. It's a little stronger, right? So that's really hearkening back to it's challenging, the people that really think that there's something, you know what I mean, as far as, pastors and leaders of churches and, and non-leaders too, but people that think that they know the Bible and they really are they're even doing works, you know what I mean, in Jesus' name. This gets even stronger in the third verse. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, and some versions say burn at the stake or burn as a martyr, but have not love, I gain nothing. It's pretty interesting because you're like, how did you would literally give yourself up as a martyr and still not love? It seems like kind of counterintuitive, right, or whatever. I think it's going to the point of head knowledge and heart knowledge. It's just two different concepts, I think that this first chapter is basically saying you can know all the right things and do all the right things, but the central part of it is love is your heart, in the matter. Is your heart right in the matter? Because it really says you'll gain nothing. And then it goes on to quantify what, and you're like, well, what is love? So it says love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. This is pretty strong there, right? I'm what I was trying to say. And of course, you're preparing this message, you know what I mean? And, you go throughout the week, and I'm like, and then I started thinking about how many times I did not do the things, throughout the week. I mean, it's pretty quickly, if you're honest with yourself, you're like, wow, I don't really know a lot about love. I think I know a lot about it, or I might have the head knowledge about it, but trying to translate that to your heart, you know what I mean, is much more difficult, right? So, I mean, we can all grow, in that. It also, and then it goes on to say, well, where does love fit into the equation of things? Because people say, I mean, you have people that'll be like, well, from the side of love and accept everything to oh, well, if you don't think how I think, then I won't love you, and you have this huge gamut right now of people in society, or whatever. Well, quite frankly, which we'll talk about a little bit, but I believe that what God's talking about is actually sort of closer to this side, but not exactly to the farthest side of what some people are talking about in society today. You are supposed to love everyone, no matter what they think, no matter what they do, you still love them. But it also says about but rejoices in the truth. So we're like really uncomfortable with plurality in the American society. Like in American society, we think something is either yes or no. It's this or this, right? Like that's how we think, like in American society. Like everything has to be a dichotomy, right? Well, interestingly, in the culture of Jesus, they talk about things being in a plurality, meaning like you can actually have both things, which is a really odd concept to Americans, because you're like, how do you have both things? How do you have truth and love at the same time? Don't you have to have truth or love? Well, that's not actually what Jesus is saying. He's saying that you can actually have both. I can love Philip, but I can also share truth into his life in a way that's loving. I can also not love him and share truth to the point where he's like, you don't care about me, you know what I mean, or whatever. And I can have the reverse, right? I can also love him, but not share any truth to him too, which is really not love at all, is what Jesus is saying. Because if you allow people, like if you think of an example, even just like a secular example, like if I knew that like today, Philip was going to leave here and he was going to get hit by a car, and I knew that. I knew it for a fact. I knew that. Wouldn't you tell him, right? Like, people would say that's not loving him if I was like, well, I'm not going to tell you. Good luck to you today, buddy. So like, if I knew truth, if I knew something that I knew to be true, and I didn't tell him, that's not love at all. And that's what Jesus is saying, that but you have to rejoice in the truth. Like, let him know the truth. And if he says, no, I'm not going to, or whatever, it's okay. We can agree to disagree, but on the other hand, I can still share truth with you. I don't have to beat you over the head with it, but I do have the duty to tell you, right? If people say, well, why would you do that? Well, if you're not prepared to do that, I would challenge the assertion that you actually know the truth, or you have the heart knowledge. So I know people were like, well, that steps on your toes a little bit, but really, I mean, if you know it to be true, if you know Jesus to be true, if you know heaven to be true, then really, like, it's not kind at all to not tell people. It's the opposite of love, right? I had heard an interview one time, and the person had said was not a Christian, as an atheist, and he said, he didn't believe in Jesus, and he said, well, how much do you have to hate someone not to tell them if you know that there's a heaven and you know that there's a Jesus? Like, I thought that was pretty impactful to me. It's like, that's pretty strong, you know what I mean, or whatever. So we should be bold, and we should tell people about Jesus, and just love them through, all stages of it, all discussions of it, So it goes on to talk a little bit more. It says, love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. And then it even is a little challenging here, where it says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. Actually, Michael and I have been talking. We talked about this recently. He's getting to that age where you're like, he's not a child, So he getting to the point where he needs to put away childish things. It's not to say he can't play or and have fun or do things or whatever. This is talking about thought process, right? Like and what it's talking about childish is talking about like being egocentric, being like thinking about yourself all the time. Those type of things. You need to step up, be a man, and be a woman, those are women. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, that then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So Paul's talking about the fact that he just even like knows this. It's even going to become more known, once we get to heaven, right? When Jesus comes back. But he's saying that it might be even more apparent, and it will be more apparent at that point. But that he is at least knows the little teeny bit, a glimmer of Jesus's love. He's been exposed to, which is kind of like blows you away, right? That like, this is just a glimmer of it. And then it goes on to say, so now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So what does it mean? It means that they abide. It means that they last forever, right? Faith, hope, and love last forever. But the greatest of these is love. So, so anyhow, I just wanted to talk about that. Talk about for King and Country, part. There's an old song. We were doing some of the old songs, today or whatever that says they will know we are Christians by our love, right? So we're going on this mission trip, people say, well, why would you do that? Why would you give up your vacation or go, even if, you get to go to Haiti, well, that's nice or whatever. Well, okay, but this is, the point of it is not to go on vacation. The point of it is to help people, right? We should be set apart in the way of people seeing that we're loved, not that we're better, but that we love people. Like whether it's in Haiti or whether it's at the grocery store, right? I mean, whether it's at school or at the horse show, right? Nothing is worse than hearing, I've heard, I know some people that are waitresses, and they would say, well, we hate Sundays working on Sundays because the church people come in and they tip worse than anybody and they're rude. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. We shouldn't be known for that, right? We should be gracious, benevolent, loving, you know what I mean? It's really challenge you to I know you get in your mind and you're like, oh, they're late and it takes forever and they're not kind to you or whatever, but I would challenge us to be set apart in love, you know what I mean? And love people. We're big kind of people who are like, well, that's kind of weird. Why would you do that? Or whatever. So, anyhow, I would end just by saying that, what is holding us back from loving people? Or doing something that God calls us to do. If you ever been to say you're at the grocery store, or you're driving down the road, or at the mall or whatever, and you feel like just sort of something saying, well, you should help somebody, or whatever. Maybe it's the person that can't pay for their groceries, maybe it's the person that is, needs help across the street or whatever, needs help carrying stuff or whatever. Why do you not do it? Right? Why do you not do it? I mean, if you're like me, you probably are well, that's not really God telling me to do that, or, oh, I'm too busy, or, oh, well, maybe they'll think I'm crazy, or, you know what I mean, or whatever, right? I mean, we all go through all these things in our mind, of why not to help people, and why not to love people or whatever. But I would just say that, just take the leap and do it. God will bless your obedience, and also through reconciling of your relationships too, right? I mean, I know everyone here, I'm sure, has been touched by a relationship that is not reconciled, right? It's just really not a great situation. One thing that causes that friction that where things are unresolved is people say, well, I'm not going to forgive Michael because he doesn't deserve it. I would challenge you, you don't forgive him because he deserves it, right? You show him grace. You do it because Jesus forgave us. If you only forgive people your whole life that deserve it, you're not going to forgive too many people. You're going to be pretty bitter. And I know a lot of people know that I'm in the nursing facility business, and I've seen literally thousands of people die. Thousands. I've never met somebody on their deathbed that was I'm glad that I held a grudge against my son. I'm happy that I took a stand against my brother because he didn't believe the same way I did. You do not hear that. I'm telling you, you do not hear that. The things you hear? I wish I would have spent more time with my brother. I wish I would have spent more time with I wish I would have loved my dad more. I wish we would have not fell apart because we got in a fight over a car or whatever, some thing or whatever. That's what you hear. I wish I would have loved God more. I wish I would have spent more time, going on a mission trip. I wish I would have I always wanted to go on a mission trip, but I didn't do it, I always wanted to go on a trip, you know, to somewhere and, you know, and meet new people and be with people and love people. And I didn't because I was too busy working. I was too busy, you know, trying to make a life and not living life, you know, or whatever. That's what people say. They don't say, man, you know, I wish I would have stayed till 6 o'clock every day at work, you know what I mean? Because I only stayed at 5:30, you know, and it was just, you know, wrecked my life, you know. They don't say that, but it's so funny how we know that, but like in our head, but like do we know that in our heart, you know what I mean? That's the thing I would challenge us to, because it will get you to think differently about life. So anyhow, that's the 2 cents on that. I don't know how long that was, but
6 minutes.
what's that?
26
Oh, 26.